Alright, hopefully sound is working now. I believe I was muted. We should be good. So firstly, hello everyone. Thank you to Scree because she has been helping me with the stream not wanting to start this morning. Apparently Wi-Fi problems were a thing again. We should be good to go now. So, we're going to go a bit off track today. I've reached that phase where I'm really procrastinating this project, which is fine. Not a good thing, but fine. So I think I'm firstly just going to do a little bit of a refresher about the basic techniques that I use when procedural modeling. Now, for this project specifically, I've talked a lot about lines and normals and curve and things like that, but there's a lot more to procedural modeling than just lines. So I'd love to discuss booleans and other procedural techniques that you can use. There's a form of a deformer basically that you can use as well, so we can take a look at those. Lots of interesting stuff basically, but point is, it's techniques that I don't necessarily use on this project specifically, because I chose this one because it kind of plays to my strengths because I love using lines so much. And I say lines, line is basically a curve, right? So I really enjoy using curves and lines and things like that because I can manipulate them in a lot of fun ways. But obviously this is a limited use case, right? It's phenomenal for your, let's say, how do I put this? For your cathedral type look, your more ornamental style modeling, let's say. So it's great for that, but it's not necessarily great for other things. Now you can use this in combination with other techniques, but generally speaking, you would most likely not just use lines and curves. You'd probably want to learn other techniques as well, especially if you are creating other projects. And even with this lantern specifically, we've got a lot of empty spaces. We don't need booleans. I mean, you can union them all together to get slightly better geometry. Granted, I would probably retopper this in any case, but be that as it may, that's a whole other topic. So, for example, let me just get an example where you can actually see what I mean. And say you do the let's say cathedral type look, you're not going to be able to get away with just lines and curves. You will need to know the other techniques as well. So let me just quickly find an example. That would be that one. See if I can actually copy that image, paste it here. Now we're going to ignore the fact that this character is not posed very well. In fact, it's not posed at all because I was lazy. Don't be like me. Do not be lazy. Finish your work, pose the character, rig the character. Yeah. But point is, for these towers, they actually can't see very well. These areas are all booleaned in. So you do need booleans. And trying to see if there's an example where you can actually see it. Probably not. Probably not. Oh, but for example, this is a pillar that I used an extrude function on. I used copies and transforms. Basically, the techniques I haven't really used with this lantern specifically. I have used extrudes, so that's pretty basic. And I did show one example of copying this around using a copy and transform. So it's not that I haven't used other techniques, but only to a limited capacity. So I think it'll be useful to go over some of the other techniques. And the other topic I wanted to talk about today would be adding, where's my concept? detailing like this along the side, so we could probably take a look at that down the line. I'm not quite sure how I want to implement that yet. Possibly, I'll think about it. I'll think about it. But we'll see how we can implement that. And I've recently decided to switch things up a little bit, and I've added my top and my bottom of this lantern, where in the past it was just flat on the ground. So that's something that could be looked at. And then I also want to do some cleanup of the network, because right now we've got a cluttered mess, right? Everything is labeled, but I don't plan this very well, in the sense of I kind of just went into the thick of it and just went with it, which is fine, but it's not quite ideal, in the sense of I think it would be better if I split this area out away from the main network, so the roof, for example, so that it's easier for me to copy onto the top and the bottom down the line. So if I wanted to use this roof on, let's say, a different project, I can just cut that section out without having to depend on the base. So that's something we can look at. All right, enough rambling. Let's get into it. So last week I did take a moment to do a quick demo, and that was just for specifically archway. So I'm actually going to delete that. We don't need that because I've spent too much time talking about lines. So we're going to try not to talk about too many lines today, because I think I've done a demo for the line technique each time. So yeah, let us see. Okay, so I'm actually going to get rid of my lantern for a moment here. Now, there's two ways you can do that. You can press the button here and it'll be gone, or you can change this to hide other objects. So that is the other option. In this case, I think I'm going to hide the other objects, just because I don't want to switch it out every time I switch between the two networks, because there will be some switching around. Right, so Booleans. Booleans are fun. It's a destructive workflow. It's procedural, but it is destructive. And by that I mean it does not give you good geometry. So you will have to retopo this down the line. There is a remesh function. I personally don't believe it to be very good. I don't think it's very optimized, and it's not good for game or form, quite frankly. I mean, visually it looks fine, but it's one of those use cases where if you've got 50 buildings, they can't be unoptimized. They need to be optimized. Otherwise, it's just going to be a mess to render. At least in my opinion. If you're doing this for a pretty render, it's fine. It's going to take a while to render, but it's fine. But if you're talking about implementing this into a game engine, etc., 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 then you need to do it properly. Procedurals modeling is brilliant, but it is not going to give you proper, let's say, hard surface topology where you've got nice, pretty folding edges and all your edges flow in the correct way. It's not going to give you that. It's going to be pretty from a distance, but it's not going to give you that. So procedural modeling is brilliant, but you're not going to get the level of quality that you would if you modeled it by hand. It's a bit like that argument where I might regret saying this, but if you take Blender, for example, if you use a bevel modifier in Blender, I can tell. Because oftentimes you'll have pinching in all your corners, not necessarily the outer corners. But let me get an example of that. That would be so cute. Oh wow, it froze. Fantastic. Let's do that, and then we're quickly going to do extra. That one, put that in there, and then we are going to do an inset and a distance. No? Why are you not working? Let me just quickly do black wire shaded. What is happening here? Of course it doesn't work. Why does it not work? Let's do... Box is fine. That part's working. Of course, when I do it on stream, it does not work. Required geometry, that's all good and good. So that part's functional. Why is it not in setting? Individual elements. That's why. Okay, so reason it was not working is if you have a cube. It's not like Maya where if you extrude and you do it, well, no, that's very difficult to explain actually. But basically, there's two ways of extruding, right? You can extrude the entire object, because keep in mind, I have not specified faces at all. I've not told it what to extrude. So it's like selecting the entire object in Maya and pressing extrude, right? But let's actually change that back. So that's going to be connected components. So extruding the entire object, as you can see. Now it looks like it's scaling, but it's actually extruding. Fantastic. So that's what it's doing. But if I change that to individual elements, you can see it treats each face as its own object, so to speak. So the reason the poly extrude wasn't working was I did not specify that to basically separate the edges, the faces. So hence why inset is not working. So if you have that on individual elements, you can actually inset this and it's all well and good. And then I want a group for the front. Now I'll go more deeper into the groups, etc., in a second. But the point of this is to actually explain about the beveling. So that's going to be that one. And okay. So the area I can see somebody use the bevel modifier, and Blender would be these corners, these inner corners. Sometimes these as well. Outer corners, it bevels brilliantly. But these inner corners, if you smooth it, you have got pinching. Always. I've not seen it not give pinching on the corners there. Maybe there's a technique to mitigate that, but I've not seen it. So the point I'm getting at here is procedural modeling is brilliant. You get something pretty, it's fantastic, it looks good on a render. But if you want proper topology, you're going to have to retopologize it after you've done the modeling. It'll give you all the bases, basically like sculpting in ZBrush. You sculpt in ZBrush, and once you're done, you have to retopo it. Looks brilliant, but it needs to be retopoed because you have not got correct topology. It's often too high poly, etc., etc., etc. Now, that's why I do use booleans with procedural modeling, because yes, booleans are destructive. Yes, it does not give you correct topology, but even this lantern that I made will need to be retopologized after I've completed it, because and maybe even cleaned up because there are some areas that are a little wonky, especially here. For example, I didn't like that very much. So there are areas that will need to be cleaned up in any case, but I'm going completely off track today. But anyway, so that is the point of that. Now, the first thing before I even get into booleans is I do not like when my model is not centered in the center of the world. I just don't. I want that to be centered, so due to that, we can fix that in two ways. The first way is you can copy the value of your scale value. If you are going to scale your cube in a way where it's no longer square, you'll have to copy it in a different way. But no, I'm getting off track again. But for the sake of the argument, uniform scale, copy the parameter and paste it into the center of the Y channel. Now, quick tip, um, it might be relevant, might not, but these types of functions, but always go XYZ. They always go XYZ. So if you know what each direction does, you can easily figure it out what is what. So for example, X is left to right, Y is up and down, Z is front to back. Keeps it simple. So I know by default my center is going to be Y because I know Y is up, so that is always going to be in the middle. So in this case, I'm not actually going to delete that. I'm going to paste relative references. Now, what does that do? It basically tells the Houdini that I want to take the value that is in the scale and I want the center of the Y channel to kind of, which is the position, right? Position, to look at this value. And you'll notice if I move this up and down, the scale is up and down, the cube moves up by 1. Now that's all well and good, but it's still not flat on the ground. So if we look at it from the front view, you'll see that it is higher than world origin. If we scale this up, you'll start to notice it's always 50% higher than the world origin, right? So due to that, you can do it one of two ways again. I tend to forget to divide, so I always multiply by values like 0.5. And this is just the way I do it. You can divide instead. But if I do that by 0.5, now if I scale it, it stays flat on the ground, which is brilliant. If you wanted to divide again instead, you can. Now I'm going to mess this up first, but let's see if I can remember. I believe it's either divide first or 2 first. Okay, it's not that way around. It's probably this way around. And that does not work. And this is why I don't divide. Because it never works the way I think it should. So we're not going to divide. We're going to forget I mentioned anything about dividing, and we're going to go back to my comfort zone. There is a way of doing it this way around, or the other way around. I just, quite frankly, because I never use it, I can't recall it. Right, so that's the one way of doing it. You can do it in your first transform, so to speak, and you can work with it that way. Let's say your cube is not symmetrical. Maybe you decided you wanted a rectangle instead. Now bear in mind, if you decide you're going to take the value, the height value, rather than the size of the uniform scale, that means you've now lost your ability to uniform scale in this node specifically, just because they're just not going to work together. But let's say I want to be able to scale on the height only. I can take that value, as I mentioned, we know X, Y, Z, so Y is always up, so we can take that value, and that's going to be in the center, and we can paste this relative reference. Again, it's too high by 50%, so you can again multiply it by 0.5, and it's all well and good. Now, in theory, if I go up, it works. But if I now uniform scale, it no longer works. So when you're building this network, you kind of have to decide, what do you want to do? Because in this case, well, I've had to make a choice. Am I going to scale this uniformly, or am I not? If I'm not going to, then I have to decide very, very thoroughly how I want to do it. But let's say I want to do it, I want to have a uniform scale, and I want to be able to scale it non-uniformly. You can also add a transform node. And I believe by default, it should be at the origin. Yeah, it is. So by it, I mean the pivot. Sorry. The pivot should be at the origin if you're done. So in this case, you now have a function to control the height as well as the uniform scale, and everything will, well, if I actually put this at uniform scale, let's delete channels, put that back to 0, and then copy that parameter, paste it, and that'll be times 0.5, not 4.5, 4.54.5. Fantastic. So now I can scale uniformly, and it actually stays at the origin along with the height. Now, this is one way of doing it. The alternative to that, that's maybe easier than copying parameters around. Now, you do need the skill of copying parameters, but you don't necessarily need to use it for this use case. Given the fact that this is, well, quite frankly, Houdini, and Houdini is brilliant, if you ask me at least, you can, instead of copying the parameters, you can use a thing called match size. Now, match size is maybe not the most logical name for what I'm going to use this node for, but be that as it may, let's say we've got that. What you can do is you can do, isn't that? Yeah. So you can play around with these settings. I'm specifically looking at height, and I want this at the center of the world. So basically test what each does. At minimum, it goes kind of to the top of where this cube was, right? So you can see, no, it's actually not at the top. It's 50% higher. It's 50% higher, but we just want the max. It's by default at center, and at none does nothing, so we want max. And then in theory, it does not work. Why does it not work? It should work. That is very annoying. Let's put that at 1 for a second. Let's just see what it's doing. Target size is fine. Max. But in theory, it should go minimum, not maximum. But minimum goes up. Why does it go up? I'm stupid. It is in fact in the center of the world. It's zeroed out. So it just looks like it's not. Fantastic. Okay. I'm crazy. Let's go. Let's continue. The answer is minimum, not maximum. It helps if you actually look at your grid and check where 0 is. Check where 0 is. But yeah, bottom line is, instead of copying parameters around, you can use a match size instead. Another use case where this doesn't necessarily just work with cubes. You can use this with anything. Not just cubes, you can have weird organic shapes, and if you want it centered in the world, you can use this. If you're, let's say, I don't advise doing this, but if you've ever built your cube away from the center of the world, no. Let's see. Don't do that. It says all the way over there. You can use this to center it. Now it does it actually automatically, because you'll see that this is set to center. It's not set to none. For set to none, it'll keep it off center. But let's say you build something all the way off to the side, you can then center it back into the world without having to use a transform, which is brilliant. So you can do that as well. Right, moving on. So bottom line is that's the best way to center your object into the world after creating a bunch of transforms. Now in this case, I'm going to use what? Let's use the match size. Why not? Just because it's fun and I don't use it that often. I should, because I was taught to use copy parameter and paste parameter. That was the technique I was taught when I was learning Houdini. So it's the one I use by default because my mentor used it, and that was the method he taught me. He never used match size. I don't know why he never used it, but I actually only learned about match size recently, which is quite shocking. But anyway, because it is a node that's used a lot, especially in VFX. It does have other use cases as well, but if I go into the details of that, I'll be talking till tomorrow. So yeah, bottom line is I can now scale my cube and all is well and good. Right, so moving on. We were talking about booleans. So let's add a boolean. And Boolean in Houdini works very similar to a Boolean would in any other software. You'll notice if I type Boolean, you've got different functions. You've got intersect, you've got shatter, you've got subtract, union, all your normal Boolean functions. Now, what is the difference between these there and that one? That's the one I chose. I just chose the default Boolean. These are basically presets. If you know I want to subtract or I want to union, you can just choose that one and it'll be already be set up for it. In my case, I want to go through them all. So I'm just using the default one and I don't necessarily know which one I want to do first. Haven't decided yet. So due to that, I choose the default one. But if we actually go into the one that says intersect, you'll see I can still change it to the other ones. So it's not really, it doesn't matter which one you take. You could take any of them and just change the function. It'll work all well and good. So for this, you need obviously two geometries. So right now we've got a cube, fantastic. Let's take a circle. No, not a circle, a tube. Let's do a tube. Now, cube is basically like a cylinder in any other software. Houdini changes the names a bit. So a cube is a box and a cylinder is a tube. But it is the same type of object. So we are going to do that as object B, and I'm quickly going to view that just to see how big it is. And it is too small for what I want to do, so I'm actually going to do a match size here just to again center it in the world, but also I want this to be bigger, so that is, let's scale the height, why not? Right, even more actually. Oh wait, set to union, that's one. I suspect it's set to union. Subtract. Why are you giving me area cross boundary? I should use. Why is it doing that? Intersect does nothing. Let's just quickly view that one and template that one. Okay. That's fine. Why is it not working there? Why are you not working? Let's do union. Fantastic, it is now working. So I'm just quickly going to play around with these just to remember what each of these does. Okay. Right, so that is a union. In other words, you're combining two objects. Fantastic, brilliant. We've got two objects that are combined. I don't particularly like that it's not cutting out the center though. But anyway, let's say subtract. And that is also not doing what I wanted to do. So all polygons, solid. That is not what I wanted to do at all. Why are you doing that? Surface, surface. All very interesting, but not what I want to do. So union works, but why is the others not working? All very, very weird. Let's cap these. It's going to be something really, really simple. I just know it. Subtract works that way, it just does not work that way. Zoom seam polygons flat. That's fine. That's not something I want to do. So I basically want to remove this element. Let me just play around with the transform quickly and see what's going on. Because it is in theory higher, so it should not be the problem. It's not the height that's the problem. Let's forget about the match size for a second here. Because I basically want to cut this section out. It's going to be so simple, I just know it. And that's going to be... which one is B? Needs to be set to solid. Needs to be set to solid. It was, in fact, very simple. Right, so the reason this was not working is I did not have end caps. My theory has also been disproven. Do not know. Okay, forget everything I said. Bottom line is union combines these two. In this case, you would again want end caps. And then intersect gives you one of them. It basically cuts it, right? So if you look at the height of this and you change that to intersect, you'll see that basically the part of the cylinder that's inside the cube has been cut. So that's what intersect does. You can also do the reverse, I believe, so let's do that one. That gives you about the same result. And then you can do subtract. In this case, because I've flipped it around, it's subtracting the area where the cube is. So you can do that. And then you've got shatter. Shatter is that align with the outline of the second object. So you can use it to, you know, do something interesting. I've never used custom. The seam kind of gives you the edges of the intersection point. So if we quickly change that to something like union, let's say you want the edges where these two pieces of geometry is intersecting and you maybe want to sweep them or do whatever you want to do, then you can use seam. I've never used detect or resolve, so I can't really tell you what they do. It's not something I use in my day-to-day. What I use most often is subtract. I use subtract a lot, just due to the fact that it's very useful for the things I like to make, which usually is something cathedral, ornate, or filigree like, and I enjoy stuff like that. It's fun, and it's pretty, so I do that mostly. So due to that, I use mostly subtract. Some of the tutorials I watch use a lot of union, for example, to how do I explain this? Let's say you've got a cube, why not? Let's do box. I always say cube, but it is a box, in the software at least. So that's going to be a cube. Let's say there's another cube, and let's template that one. And then I'm not going to censor this or anything because it's just for demo's sake. Let's say you're combining two objects like that, then you would use a boolean, and do that, put that in there, and then it's currently set to subtract, so you would use boolean. And then this combines everything. So in theory, in the inside, you should not have any weird geometry. Because this is intersecting on the inside, if we actually template both of these, or template one and view the other, you can see by the edge of the cube that it is intersecting. So that's basically to delete the inner geometry and give you an edge that runs around here. And then if you want to then go and bevel this, hello, bevel, polybevel. If you then go and bevel this, you'll get a very functional bevel that does that. But if we remove the boolean, not template it, remove it, and we use, let's say, argument's sake, merge instead. Come on, there you go. If we use merge instead, we'll get that one goes in there, that one goes in there. We've now got a merge. You'll see we don't get a bevel here. So when you're adding beveling, it's better to have your objects booleans together if you want the boolean to be, sorry, if you want the bevel to affect these types of intersections. So I very rarely union things together just because I don't create things that needs it. But if I were to create things that need it, I would obviously use that instead of a merge because this just looks cleaner. If we go to, I think it's smooth shaded. What did I do? Smooth shaded. And then obviously you need to fix the normals, but be that as it may, and you'd probably want to add extra division to it because that looks prettier, right? That just looks prettier than let's do a merge. And void that one. It looks cleaner than this. So the point is, if you want to do beveling and you want to affect the edges there, you need to boolean your stuff together. So that's booleans. The next thing I wanted to talk about is extrude because I haven't really spoken about the, let's say, the functionality of it. So if we can hook that up to that. Now for those of you that were here at the beginning of the stream, I wanted to demonstrate an inset just for the case of showing where bevels can go wonky in let's say automatic functions like bevel modifiers in Maya, and sometimes even Houdini. Sometimes you'll get pinching in Houdini's corners as well if you use a bevel modifier. So it is something to keep in mind. All shortcuts have their pitfalls. And I call it a shortcut because you save time on it, but it doesn't necessarily give you the clean result that you need for your final render in a project. So bevel modifiers and bevel function in Houdini, anything that's procedural has its flaws. It's never going to be as perfect as you're doing it by hand. Now, for some cases, it might not matter, but for other cases, it will matter. So yeah, but that's a whole other tangent that I'm going on there. But point is, that is an area where I've lost my train of thought. Let's park that thought. So let's get to the point. Functions in a poly extrude. You've got connected components, which basically extrudes the entire thing. But if you change that to individual elements, you can get something like that. Absolutely brilliant. You can use a group to specify which faces to extrude. Let's say I'm going to do this by hand, which is not something you want to do, but let's group that. And then I'm going to place that at the top. It's group 1. I can then say in my extrude, okay, only extrude group 1, right? So that'll be that. And then you can, seems like I've selected more than one edge. Then you can kind of isolate your selection down to those areas. Now this is not very procedural because I've manually selected the faces, but there are workarounds for that. In the sense of there are other ways, more procedural ways of selecting faces, but I'm not going to go too deep into that right now. Then you've got inset, obviously, which just insets it as it does any other software. You've also got a twist function, which quite frankly I've never used. You can use it, I just have not. So let's get rid of the insert actually and just focus on, let's say, that. And then now I believe I'm in the wrong settings to actually see that, so we need the wireframe for that. So it kind of shows you what it adds extra division. I very rarely use the extra divisions, but the option is there, you can use it. And then you can obviously transform the extruded front JAWS content. Here I'm just zooming in and out using the scroll wheel, and it's giving me that functionality, right? So if we actually look, I wonder what if it actually shows here. No, it does not show here when I do that. Highly inconvenient. Oh, it's the insert. And that's what that's doing. It's the insert that's causing the scroll wheel to do interesting things. Right, so you can obviously faces, and you can decide whether you want local or global. Up to you. That would be global. And then obviously local would give you something else, right? You can also combine the two, and then that's translate. I would say similar to it doesn't do similar to the twist, but that's literally that rotates. You've got scale functions. I'm not sure what shear does. No, that's still scale. It's not something I've ever used, but it does give you something interesting. It does give you something interesting. Let's leave it at that. I never use shear. I sometimes use scale. I sometimes use not translate, maybe rotate, but rarely. I use it pretty much the default functions for this. Maybe there is a use case where you would want to branch out from that. I just quite frankly have not encountered it. Right, groups. Groups are the brilliant part of the extrude because oftentimes you can use the extrude to get the group you need in order to do a different function down the line. For example, let's say I create a group for the out group, the front group, before the extrude would do it. So what is that extrude front group? That would be this face here and that face there. Now, let's say, argument's sake, I wanted to, down the line, do another extrude, and go in here, do that, and insert this. If I insert this, it's going to insert everything, right? Let's just quickly do individual elements, not connected components. If I insert this, it's inserting literally every single face on this object. But I actually only wanted to insert on this area here. So what I do is I would get the front group, and now it's only inserting here. And now let's say I want to insert it. and then I want to, I can take it inwards. Maybe I want to take it inwards. Maybe I want to do that. Or maybe I want to create a new group. Have a better naming than I just did, but argument's sake, extrude front. Two, you don't generally want to have two groups with the same name. Just it's first it classes up your scene, but secondly, maybe you still want to have the functionality of that exterior one. So argument's sake, let's do it that way, and then do another extrude, and then specify I want the group front. That's going to be the second one, and I want to extrude that inwards. That's a bit far. There you go. So then I can do that. Or if I chose to do something else, what are we going to do? Let's see. Maybe I want to do the sides. If I want to extrude the sides, I can go here and I can specify not front two. I want extrude side. I'm just quickly going to get rid of all the information we have here so we can kind of get a clean slate. I can now extrude this. Now in this case, maybe that's not the best functionality this here, but I do have that option too. So you can kind of see how I've got an A result, granted. Do I like this result? Probably not. I don't know what I would use this for, but point is, using groups has allowed me to get this shape without any manual editing. I've not selected any faces manually or done anything like that, which means I can scale this cube and I'll still have all my extrudes, everything will work well and good. I can decide, well, I want my first extrude to go further out. Again, everything still works. I've not lost any functionality. I can decide, well, actually, I want this inset to be bigger or smaller. You see what I mean? I can make all these edits down the line. I can just get all the functionality in that I need down the line, and I can later decide, well, I actually want to change the look of it, and it'll all stay together, it won't break, everything will be well and good. So that makes it fun. Right, so that's extrude. The other fun function we have is, I like to call them deformers. I don't actually know if they're called a deformer. Quite frankly, I don't actually know what they're called. Let's do, I think it's called flare. No, it's called bend. It's not called flare. I don't want that one. Let's do flare, bend. And then just to make it more interesting, firstly, this box needs to be centered. Just for my insanity's sake, I need it to be centered. And I'm going to set this at 1 just so we have like a default size, and then I'm going to make this maybe taller. Let's make it taller. Not 22, let's do twice the height, and then I'm going to add divisions just so it's easier to demonstrate what I want to demonstrate. So that's going to be like that. Let's do 10, and that's going to be 5. Why not? We've now got a higher polys cube. So bend. By default, it's going to do that. Let's quickly move. So it's kind of bend. Now you'll notice this is off center. And that's because when I added the bend, my cube wasn't at the center of the world. So we can quickly go down and set capture region, and it'll, let's change that to front and zoom out a bit. No, let's just go down, and we can specify I want it to capture within this region, and it'll do that. And then I can zero this out because I do want this to be zeroed. No, I don't want the height to be zeroed. I want the, let's say, the X direction to be centered. So you've got that, and you can adjust the length here. You can also specify direction, so let's say we want that to be zeroed out. Maybe not that one. In this case, let's specify maybe up, I don't know, for argument's sake. So that is all well and good. Keep in mind our box is now not centered in the world, so that is again not great for this type of modifying. So I'm quickly going to do a match size, put that at minimum. We're pretty in depth about match size, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining that side of things. Though if you have questions, feel free to let me know, obviously. So that is the bend, and now I can actually redo that. Again, I'm going to zero that part out, and zero that part out, and we should, in theory, be good to go. And then let us see. Now that is working. Let's change that to perspective so we can see what it's doing. So that is bending it in a direction, right? Very fun to play with. You can also, instead of using a bend, you can use a twist. So twist literally twists it. Very similar, you also have a twist function on the extrude. I've not deleted. Take a look at what that does, but if you twist it, you can see it twists, which gives a very fun effect. Now granted, topology isn't ideal for this. You can see we've got some wonkiness, but be that as it may. So that's what twist does. Quite frankly, I very rarely use twist, but there is a twist function. Right. I'll be right back. So I'll see you guys in like 5 minutes. Let's see if it's reconnecting. Right, sorry guys, I think my Wi-Fi has just... Let's see if it reconnects. And let us see if it reconnects. Right, sorry guys, Wi-Fi has been crashing on me today. But hopefully, fingers crossed. Right. So, on my lantern, we've got a lot of shapes that are determined by lines, right? With like this roof is, this part is, and so on and so forth. Using, let's say, what is it called? Flare, taper, and squish, you can kind of create these intricate shapes without having to use the whole line, view, normal type shapes. Granted, it's not perfect, but it does give you an interesting effect, and you can kind of play around with it to get fun shapes. 100% of the time we'll use a line for this type of thing rather than a taper, just because it gives me more control. It just does. But having said that, if you want to use a taper instead, by all means do. It is easier to do. Yes, you don't have the same level of control, uh, but at the end of the day, it is easier and it still gives you a good result. I personally really like this shape because it's pretty, quite frankly. I just like it. But yeah, taper is one of those things you can use. I'm actually not sure what the difference between linear and smooth is, but smooth is also nice. Um, you can also go higher than the value they have at default. This is with it at 4 rather than 2. Now, it does look like 2 is the max you can go, but most of these you can dial higher. And you can get more extreme of a result this way, which is all very fun. So you can kind of play around with that, see what you get. Now, I don't have enough topology for this type of shape for what I'm trying to do, so I probably need more topology for that, but be that as it may. So that's kind of another shape, another node that is firstly useful, but secondly that allows you to really play around and have fun and explore shapes very quickly. Because I can later then go, well, I don't actually want a box. Don't want a box. I want a cylinder. So that's going to be a tube. I want a tube. And I can add divisions to that so we can have, is it rows? Yeah, it's rows. I can decide, well, I want that, and let's get this a bit taller. I actually want this to be a tube. I don't want it to be a box. Then I could go in and I can play around with my squish. I can change where it's scaling from. I can obviously make the example more intense. I can add a taper on top of, and then lots of things you can play with. You can invert the taper